So, because this often gets submitted, I want to thank up front Jerome Savage and Michael Wayne for setting this up. And Michael in particular did phenomenal work to actually solicit the participants. So my job was easy. I think the real reason they picked me for the moderator is I was the only one willing to sit at the small table. So let me introduce the speakers, so actually the panel. We have a nicely balanced panel. We have two, this is a subject of cloud computing on stage. Just a few words about it in a couple minutes, but we have two people on the provider side. We have Sanjay from IBM, and we have Chris from Microsoft. And we have two on the consumer side. We have Mutuk and Paul who are representing the ISVs who consume the technology and adopt it. So I think you're going to have a really nice balance. And my goal here is that I want the audience to get a lot out of this, but I also want the panel who are really experienced in their own domains to actually be able to communicate the way they feel about what is an important business. So before we get started, just a few pieces of data. The reason I picked this topic, and I'm passionate about it, well, I was at Microsoft and worked in this area, so had some degree of familiarity with it until March of this year, but just a few data points just worth bringing out. This may be the biggest tech phenomenon that has occurred in the last 10, 15, 20 years. It rivals the rise of the internet in terms of its impact, and certainly it's up there in terms of its expenditure. Just a few cool words. Basically, people think about the cloud as roughly 4 or 5 layers. At the bottom, infrastructure. And that's where Amazon is the big name. Amazon, and by the way, infrastructure doesn't represent by any means the largest segment or the fastest growing segment. It represents the first segment. It's a foundation. And Amazon basically, it's not over yet, but it's certainly made an incredible inroads into that. But that business last year, 24 billion, 31 billion this year, and going up to about 60-odd billion in 2021. I mean, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. The next layer, one of the biggest, is one of the bigger ones, platform as a service. And that's the stuff that runs on top of it, databases. You can also consider the applications like SAP. While they're kind of in the software business as well, they're also a platform supporting other things. So you get databases, dev tools. Again, it's the second largest in terms of growth, but it's actually the smallest in terms of absolute numbers, but a fundamental element. And the big players there, again, that's Oracle with database, Microsoft there with things like SQL Server, its dev tool environment. But again, fundamental, those companies care a lot. GitHub's acquisition from Microsoft sort of talks about how much people they care about that business. Again, 12 billion last year, growing to about 28. The next of the big dogs, is business processing as a service. That's what people are paying for all this to actually run all the stuff that is below it. Because what's happened is a huge outsourcing market has emerged for people to manage, even though the cloud is supposed to be a more straightforward method of doing the business. Essentially, what's happening is the CIO's role is slowly being outsourced in some ways, or at least changing inside the corporation to be managing environments that actually manage those cloud environments. And that's the second biggest segment of all. It's 42 billion in 2017, going up to 58 billion in 2021. The total market this year, 175 billion, it's just this year. and 2021, 278 billion. So we're seeing massive change. It's driving tremendous changes not only in the roles of companies in enterprises who used to run IT, and that's you guys, is changing your jobs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And it's also changing the economies of the business. And let's get the panel up. Let's see, Sanjay. Sanjay's the Global VP, Watson and Cloud Services at IBM. So managing a lot of the topics that are in the news. And I'm going to ask Sanjay the first question at the end, and basically Sanjay bought, or it's actually Sanjay's company bought the first question with an outlay of 34 billion last week. We were hoping for more, but that's the best they could do. Okay. Okay, and the second of the platform providers, Chris Marin. Chris is Business Development Executive at Microsoft. Works there locally. So Chris will represent the Microsoft perspective. Mutuk Karpakakunjaram, did I get that right? Yes. Is the founder and president of All Elements, an independent software company that works on performance management in the enterprise. And last but by no means least, Paul Mojica, and Paul is the CEO at Venubi, a collaboration technology. Close enough. All Elements. So. I'm going to ask these guys to take a minute or two, just introduce themselves, because I did probably a poor job, and these guys can describe their company and themselves a little bit better than I do, and then we'll start off with the first question.
Okay, thank you. Cliff. So let me go first, since I'm sitting next to the main host. So Sanjay Panel, the way I describe myself is that professionally I've worked for now 2 companies. The first company where I spent most of my career was Cisco. It was good to see Matt here, who we have worked together a long time. Fantastic company, and about a year or so I've now been at IBM. I'm half Cajun because I went to LSU, and I love Cajun cuisine. And my son now, who is a Gator at University of Florida, and LSU was just there, and he texted me and said, "Dad, best tailgating ever, thanks for sending LSU over." And then they end up beating LSU.
Is the microphone on?
It is out. Thank you.
Good evening. Cliff membership, thanks for having me. Chris Marin, I'm with Microsoft. I've been in the tech space for about 20 years, a mixture of what I call big IT between Cisco and Microsoft, and 3 startups. And originally born in Boston, raised in Miami, settled here with my wife about 11 years ago because we heard it's good to be near family before you start one. And now 3 kids later, we can say yes. That sort of worked according to plan. I'm in business development for Microsoft. So what that means is I'm talking to both government and commercial mid-market customers, talking about how to improve outcomes using the cloud. So I look forward to the discussion.
Hello, I'm Mutuk Karpakakunjaram. I'm the founder at All Elements, and it's a small growing startup company based out of American Underground in Durham, and we are in HR tech space. And prior to founding All Elements, I used to work at IBM for 15 years and kind of done the rounds in IBM, and thought I need to fix the broken HR system problem. There you go. Prior to coming here, I was born and raised in India, and 20 years in North Carolina. I think I can call myself a Southerner. So that's me. Looking forward to having some good discussion tonight.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Mojica. I am the founder and CEO of Venubi, and this is my beautiful wife right here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here without you.
This now empty.
You get big kudos from being here.
Yeah. So just a little bit of background. We're from South Florida originally, and about 9 months ago, we made the segue all the way to the RTP area. And one of the main reasons why I decided to gravitate over here and I convinced my wife is because of the tech space that's available over here. Coming from South Florida, it's very diverse in technology, but over here, it's even better. And so I was looking and thriving for something that would allow Venubi to grow. And essentially, what Venubi is, we're a small to mid-sized company where we look for similar businesses just like us who are looking for manufacturers, distributors, suppliers around the world. And we are helping them facilitate the qualifying process and the purchasing process online in a more efficient way. And so today I'm actually really excited to be on the panel here because the team and I, my development team, we were talking about what's going to be the next step for Venubi 2.0. Which cloud are we going to build on top of, or are we going to do a hybrid? And just the whole conversation just started spinning up. And Michael Wayne over there, thank you by the way, was like, well, you should come and join and see what's going to be happening. So we love your perspective. So thank you.
Great, thanks. I got some prepared questions, but the objective here is that the questions start to come from the floor. As soon as you're ready, the sooner the better. But to get things going, I'm going to ask the panel some questions. Again, feel free to jump in anytime with an additional question, and we'll start, again, as I said, paid the golden ticket there. So IBM and Red Hat made news last week with the largest tech acquisition in history in current dollars. So if you adjust for inflation, so there's a couple of bigger ones, but they happened long enough ago that the current value would be lower. So an amazingly newsworthy, people arguing about do they overpay, underpay, how's it going to be? So feel free, please tell us all about that.
Yeah, thank you. Good. So I think if you think about the big customers, big customer I mean is the Fortune 500. You all know those clients, the Walmart, JPMCs, and you can go out on the global arena as well. All these big customers who have phenomenal amount of presence, including the number of employees they have, the global footprint they have, the scale of business they have, they're all going through different phases of digital transformation. They're all trying to figure out which cloud to go to or not go to, how do you change your process, how do you use AI, machine learning, all the buzzwords. They're all trying to figure out what we got to do in that space. Now, a company like IBM had to think about how, because IBM has a lot of presence in many of these clients from a historical perspective. Cliff joined IBM in 1971, spent 30 years at IBM, played a major role in getting that presence of IBM into those clients, whether it's the GTS businesses or GBS businesses. Now, those same companies are going through transformation. So you have been there 20 years, will not earn you the right to get more business as you go forward. So what the strategy overall was, how do you get into this big play called cloud adoption or cloud computing, aligned with the digital transformation of the company's processes. So for that, IBM had to think about that how do you go about doing it. And they needed a big open source technology play to go after, which could give them that mind share and that technology in which you can continue to be relevant with these big clients. So that was the overall thinking behind it. But then as you go further into it, IBM had been investing in Red Hat for the last 20 years. So they have been an open source supporter, and have been going on for a while. There are a lot of synergies. Red Hat needed, from IBM, the scale of the footprint in these clients because it was a business that has been growing very fast. It has been great to see how Red Hat, probably the biggest company coming out of Raleigh and growing, where the Raleigh headquarter building, I know a lot of people there, Raleigh headquarter building has one of my favorite restaurants, Boku. Has anyone gone there?
Yeah, it shuts down in January and moves.
Well, Red Hat now has not renewed their lease.
Right.
Because they had to increase their presence, but the good news is, Boku is going to move where Anne used to be, right next to on Western Parkway. So the restaurant is moving over there, which is much closer to me than Raleigh headquarters. But the point is, Red Hat has been growing very, very fast as well. So I think there's a lot of good synergies, but a lot of things to be done together. And future will tell how it plays out. But that was one of the reasons.
Question. So one of the things that Ginny Rometty mentioned when she sort of talked about the acquisition after it went public was that the big growth and we saw from the numbers, the big growth in Azure adoption, in cloud adoption is yet to come. They estimate that about 20% of large enterprises have adopted the cloud so far, which is, The rest is, there's a huge amount yet to come. And that what's going to drive them is not what drove Amazon, which is companies, what they call born in the cloud. For my company, I do my first IT implementation in the cloud. So these companies with their own database investments will migrate to the cloud slowly, and for a period, probably a long period, possibly forever, they'll run what that people are calling a hybrid cloud, which is some stuff will be in the data center, some stuff will be in the cloud, and the people who provide those systems will make them coherent. That is, it won't be a huge, hard barrier between them. It will be easy to develop software and run applications that run either locally for one reason or another, or move to the cloud to be managed differently. So, Chris, I want to talk a little bit about how important is hybrid cloud from Microsoft's strategy.
Yeah. I think it's hugely important. So if you think about Microsoft's roots, well, we do have consumer now. We have had consumer services like Hotmail for some time. Probably since right around 1997 or so, our legacy has really been in the enterprise, and then we've sort of evolved that. And so we have this footprint of Fortune 500 and then more, right, mid-market that are on-prem today. And we feel it's a competitive advantage when you look at us versus a Google or versus an AWS, not IBM, because they also have, I think, a legacy of hybrid, that we, and we have, there are also independent data points. Folks have said, hey, Ms. CIO, where do you think you'll be in 10 years? Are you going to be 100% in the cloud? And the vast majority, upwards of 50, 60%, said no. We're going to be operating hybrid, both on-prem and in the cloud, taking the best approach for those two options, or if you consider hybrid a third option, to really solve specific problems. And we're going to figure out what's the best approach. Thank you very much. Thanks for getting the water. And so we've been pretty deliberate. Microsoft has been pretty deliberate. If you look at our messaging and you look at how we're having those conversations with those Fortune 500 companies or even mid-market companies, and we're saying, look, we're not here to say this is where you need to be. What we're trying to say is let us help you pick what you think the best approach is. What's the right approach for a specific application? Maybe that is cloud. Maybe it's not. And then support them along the way. So we, again, for a lot of reasons, view hybrid to be very critical for our go-to-market success.
I just want to add one quick point, because this is a session of IT professionals. So one point I want to make was, you talked about the digital transformation plan, we just touched upon as well. There are like 4 areas which will get very critical for all the IT professionals all over the world. Number one, we got to figure out how to migrate to on-prem, off-prem, whatever it is. We've got to figure out how to migrate the current applications that are working into that. It has to happen. Second aspect is, how do you modernize these applications? Application modernization is going to be a big, big investment and will require a lot of IT professionals. Third aspect is, if you're going to adopt more cloud, then you need to come up with cloud-native applications that will work for your franchise. I was at Nationwide recently, and they were really focusing on how to get our driver user behaviors, because they want to figure out if Chris is calling, he's a bad driver, they want to charge him more. If I'm calling, I'm a great driver, they want to charge me less. There's a little Microsoft IBM going on here. But the point is that you have got to figure out that. And the last aspect is, you got to worry about security and you got to worry about data sovereignty. So all those 4 are one key where IT professionals will be in huge demand in the future of where tech is going.
I think we'll get some more discussion on that too. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I won't grab the mic. Paul, now we'll move to the consumers. The consumers of the technologies, either the beneficiaries or the victims, depending on which way you look at it. But let's talk a little bit about adoption. And so as you start, with your company, as you start looking at the cloud, what are the big drivers for you? What challenges do you face? What's an obvious move? What's a difficult move? What considerations do you have to make when you're basically deciding to move to the cloud?
So a couple of the things that we were talking about on the development side is, and actually Mutuk and I, we were having a conversation of what stack are you going to build off of? And I think one of the biggest things for us is, one, I'm facing with my developers decentralization, remote workers, making sure they have access securely into whatever platform we're going to use. But then at the same time, are we going to take the approach of utilizing one specific stack or one company like Google Cloud or Microsoft Cloud or an IBM's cloud? Or are we do what I would call a cloud hybrid of the 3 major or 4 major organizations? And so the biggest thing that we're looking into is what does each company do very well within their respective area of cloud, and are we able to tap into that to really make our product great? So that's a huge question that we have, and we're constantly just drumming up, trying to figure out answers on our own. But to speak to, I also come from the corporate world as well, and I worked at Citrix, so we're right in the space between both of you, providing the virtualization. That was when I was over there. So I kind of understand a little bit of the terminology here. And when I'm looking at the consumer side or the startup side of things, we are still facing the same concerns that you're addressing for the Fortune 500s. And so when I see that, I'm like, okay, well, one, obviously financing for any startup is a big deal. But let's say that were the case, which company is going to be more agile to help us to grow in the way that we're going to, with trust and transparency as well? So those are some of the key things that we're really just entertaining and looking towards when we talk about who we're going to adopt in the near future.
So who'd you choose?
Hey, you guys want to convince me?
There's a sales rep.
Yeah, I know. When I found out, I was like, great, this is a great conversation. It's still up in the air. We're deciding, and it was a huge push, believe it or not, the Red Hat acquisition. And it got my attention because we are starting off in an open source platform. And so in any startup, the main thing is you're low on funds, you have to get up, scale fast, and what can you use that's out there? And open source is definitely one of the main reasons that we're able to grow so quickly. So because of the fact that IBM has done that, it allows me to say, okay, well, they're just looking beyond enterprise systems or enterprise companies, but also looking at how can we look at the next generation to grow to.
Okay, so you're holding your cards pretty close.
I'm holding my cards close.
I think it's going to multi-cloud, so they'll all be happy.
Yes.
So Mutuk, so you certainly can expand on that, but also the question is, so as you start looking at implementing your technology in the cloud, what kind of business changes does that drive for you or for your customers?
So to continue where he left, we are on Amazon, so AWS, and so if you look at how the whole cloud adoption is, kind of gone into companies, small, big, and even in startup, I think there are 3 things that's really key. One is you can innovate much faster, and you can get your product to the market much quicker. And the third thing, it's not something that people usually think about, but your IT team will be really happy. And the reason I'm saying this is first, innovation. Now, the technology that is available today, if you look at it from the software point of view, there is several self-service products that are available. So you can just buy off the shelf and start working on your productivity tool. Or if it is a development or design project that you're working on, you can pretty much buy things on your own. So it has changed how the software is procured. Now on the hardware side, the same thing is what cloud is doing. I can just go spin up a new instance and up and running in the next 5-10 minutes. And we have literally done this for several clients, testing running new experiments and testing. This is phenomenal. And the second thing is, because we are able to do these experiments much faster and prove what is working and what is not working, we can get or ship the product to the customers much faster. And then the third thing is I don't have to worry about putting a new server, provisioning it, how to configure it, worry about security and things like that. Now, everything is taken care of mostly. And all I have to do is, decide I'm going to start with this small instance, and as I grow, it can scale up, I can scale up, scale down, and it's just great. So from that point of view, it's completely changing how fast we can develop new technologies, new products, new services.
So So wait, stick with you for a second, Mutuk.
All right.
So good question. So you basically talked about speed,
Mhm.
rapid evolution, virtualization. So you really don't care about the environment you're in. You essentially just basically get the resources you need. And I think you sort of hinted at it, which is free,
Mhm.
which is at a certain scale, almost all the service providers are willing to give you stuff free. Like the first hit is free. But so how does your company look? How do you look to the traditional sort of enablers of getting your company done? Systems integrators, value-added developers.
Right.
Do they have a role in your life anymore?
So, not a whole lot, but at the same time, because now we are in this very flexible environment of bringing up a new instance and whenever we want, it has also helped us to work with developers and partners. So for example, recently we brought in a new customer from Silicon Valley, and they are probably in the second or third round of funding, and they're about 100 employees, probably where I see All Elements maybe 2 or 3 years from now. That's this company. So they started using our product, and they are in customer experience space. And they said, hey, what you have for goals management and performance management is really cool. Can we start developing something off of your product that will help us? And we are a small team, and we don't have, like hundreds of developers working on it that I can carve out some small team and make them work. So we said, okay, let's create a new instance and completely virtualize that, and then we will give it out to this new team, and they will play around with it. They will come back without disrupting anything to our main production system. So we started doing this, and we said, okay, we will get back to you in 3 weeks, but in less than a week, we are up and running. So it kind of speeds up that kind of integration with developers, ISVs, much faster.
So you can build a certain ecosystem around yourself with
absolutely.
value-added partners that are
Right. And then if for whatever reason, that doesn't work out, we can shut it off, and we don't have to worry about paying and things like that.
Yeah. So I'm going to run back through the for the ISV. We're going to come back to you guys in a second, but I'm going to ask Paul one more question. And because you were so evasive on the previous question,
He believes in the multi-cloud journey.
right. No, I'm really not trying to do. But now, instead of you don't have to be concrete about it, but just in general, what are the things you consider now? You start looking for your partners. What are the things you really sort of sit there and when you build a checklist with your team and say, where are we going? What's on the checklist?
So my background is not necessarily like complete development. I come from a business side of things. And one of the core tenets that we've scribed into Venubi is transparency, trust and transparency. And so when I look at any organization I'm working with, I'm first looking at the culture to see exactly where they're going. And also internally, if I can have access to the internal culture, that'd be great as well. But that's a huge driving factor because it's something that we push and we're going to push onto our community of users. So definitely trust and transparency. I would like to know. It's getting a lot easier over time to understand how much we're going to end up spending. So budget-wise, there's been a lot of tools that you guys have put out to be able to really just take advantage and say, well, if I need to spin up this instance, how much is this going to cost me down the line? And also the usage that comes out of it as well. So thank you very much for developing tools for individuals like myself to be able to understand where it's going. But trust, transparency, budget, and those are the two main things that I'm looking at from the business standpoint in order to make a qualified decision of, is this who I want to work with?
Yeah, so it's not all just feeds and speeds. It's do you trust the company? Is their pricing clear? Is their strategy clear? Free is fine, but no surprises.
Actually, we can make it free is fine, but don't nickel and dime.
Right. Fair enough. Point. All right, Sanjay, back to you again. I'm going to combine two questions. There's a lot of requirement. You're hearing a lot of things about things like redundancy. So people, particularly large enterprises, they said, okay, I'm going to put my data in the cloud, but I want it in two places that are separated by climate, earthquake prevalence, fires, so on, risk, right? So it's basically duplication. And yet they're also saying they're asking for data sovereignty. China is an example, but there are a lot of countries smaller than China that are saying, my data does not leave my country's borders. So how do you deal with security, data sovereignty, and redundancy?
So I'm going to add a few more to those. There are a lot of them. GDPRs out there. You have the cloud. You have this whole issue around different countries may want to protect their information within their own environments. So there are a lot of these requirements want to keep coming. Then you look at the finance customer base, which a lot of companies do a lot of business with. The financial regulations are so stringent that will just add another variable to your, to answer your question. So, short answer is, it is a very complex problem, but at the same time, that is where the opportunity is. That is exactly where the opportunity is, and what is really happening is innovation. Innovation in this space is just mind-boggling. I'll give you one example of recent work that I did. How many of you go to the Weather Channel? All of you, right? The Weather Channel, right? The hurricanes come, they're all looking at it. And then you go to this app, it's called TWC, it's the weather company, the company that IBM bought a few years back. I recently got to spend a lot of time with how that app is working, especially when we talked earlier, we were discussing hurricanes coming and things like that. When the hurricanes come, the amount of hits that happen just go mind-boggling. But the whole design and architecture of that app, the multi-instance, the multi-regions, everybody's checking everywhere, right? You have people everywhere we know, everyone wants to know what's happening in North Carolina, are you okay or not okay? But the point I want to make is that more and more of the app design, this is where I talked about the app modernization, will rely on aspects of multi-instance, multi-region, will have to deal with security. And if security is going to become the roadblock, that's what Chris was saying when he talked about hybrid cloud, clients will have where they will do stuff within their own premises. They will do it within their own confine. I was recently for the first time in Strasbourg, France. Beautiful city, I was there for only one day. I spent like 6 cities and 6 days in Europe. But Strasbourg, France, I was there to spend time with Credit Mutual. It's the largest bank in France. And it was 4 hours spent with the head of technology there, who's doing a lot of digital transformation, and all the discussions were around aspects of financial regulations that have to be taken care of, or they will not do this cloud adoption. But at the same time, the things that Mutuk talked about, flexibility and ease of use, all those things is why they have the initiative to really figure out how to solve this problem. And that's, I think, the journey we're all going to go through the next 3, 4, 5 years.
So, Chris, I know you've probably got a lot to say about those topics. So, data sovereignty, site redundancy.
Yeah, do you mind if I
please
riff a little bit and maybe do some, just following up on some other things with some local examples. So the data sovereignty is a really interesting one. I had a local benefits company come to me about a month ago, give or take. They said, Chris, we need to partition all of the Canadian data that we have, and we need to keep it in Canada. Can you do that? I said, yes, we can do that. But I want to move the rest of the database. Yep, we can do that. You're going to test the app, right? Yep, we'll test it. So a client of theirs came to them and said, all data at rest for Canadian citizens must stay within Canada. We have 2 data centers in Canada. And that follows a theme that I'll touch on and I'll expand on in just a second. So we had a partner help them out. Went so well, he calls me back a week later. He says, Chris, yes, can we do the same thing for China? Yes, we can. So increasingly, as these, you can call them stringent, I would call them maybe specific requirements for different countries, right? Either get raised up to the level of GDPR or they go beyond that. We're seeing that demand. Folks are saying, hey, it's not good enough that you're GDPR compliant across your entire fabric, which we are. We want it in our country. Okay. And so if you look at our strategy from an infrastructure point of view, it's both one of breadth and depth. It's 54 data regions globally, but increasingly, we're not just putting one data region down, and a data region in Microsoft language, sorry, is many, 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 many football fields of compute and storage and stuff, right, and software. But it's not just one, it's at least two, and they're always geo-redundant. So that's, again, Microsoft land, I don't know how close this is to industry standard, it's 400 plus miles away. So that's happening in, over the next 12 months, Norway, South Africa, Switzerland, Germany, UAE, those are the ones I can remember, in addition to our current footprint. We do have a startup program called BizSpark. We can talk about that offline. I don't know if you've looked at that. And then on the trust side, one of the things that we've tried to do is, in addition to what I would call meeting the mail, things like SOC 2, SOC 3, 27018 from an ISO point of view, GDPR, you can do things with our cloud like you can run a pen test. You can pretend it's your data center, and until a year ago you had to tell us, because we didn't know if you were a good guy or a bad gal, right? Now you don't even have to do that. Don't ask me how we do that. I don't know. But we do carry that card vis-a-vis trust, vis-a-vis compliance, the ability to pull out your data, and we'll show you how you do that. That's all very critical. So.
Great, very comprehensive, thank you. Gonna switch gears just a little bit. In a room full of IT professionals, how is the cloud, this environment, how's it changing careers? And I want to go to Mutuk to start with, but I'd like to turn it over to any of you, because I think each of you will have a perspective on this. So you're in mid-career, or you've got, or you're towards the end of your career and you're looking for the next gig though, or what would you advise your kids or your students to do? And how is it changing with the things that they would focus on?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of convergence that's happening in terms of the areas of expertise within IT. So whether you're a pure developer, or a designer, support person, it doesn't matter anymore, because you're now working as a team, churning out products and services. You are expected to do a lot more than just your domain area. So I think the first thing I would look at is, okay, if I'm a developer, can I also understand a little bit on the front end side, on the back end side? Can I also, run some test cases, package all this together so that when I push this code to a new cloud instance or wherever, this is like fully tested and ready. So for that, I think I need to have all these capabilities and not just box myself into just one area. The other things I'm also seeing from even our own team is like we heavily work with students in North Carolina State. And these engineers are like really, they're learning a lot, they want to get their hands dirty. So when we work with them, they're like really hungry. Okay, I want to do not just backend programming, I want to do this too. How can you expose to that? There's tons of materials out there that's free, videos. And if you have lynda.com subscription, you have that, which now Microsoft owns. So there's tons of materials out there, and you can get up and running in a few weeks. Whether it is even learning machine language, Python, doesn't matter. I think I would fully utilize that and still keep your domain area of expertise, because that's not going to go away, but adding more value would be when you know that it's not just one area that you're delivering, but all these together, now you become like a whole package. And I think that's what is going to be expected in the next few years.
Does anybody else like to add anything to that? Oh.
Favorite topic. The Marin and I used to do the work when we formed the Services Academy, and a couple things I'll say. One is that I think what's really changing is how we are learning. It used to be like, okay, look, we would have the Service Academy. I was at one point hiring 250 college grads every year, coming into 5 different countries, and we would have this robust program, class. I think what's really changing with the technology evolution is the learning methods are changing. Some of the classroom stuff is still there, we're always there, but more and more people are learning in chunk bites. That's one thing that's changing. And the second thing that's really changing is if you have like computer science, data science, electric, any of those tech degrees, my nephew, they pay way too much money in my opinion. I mean, it's a good thing, but salaries have gone up, which is good. But then the key here will be the fundamentals are not going to change. And one of the things that you talk about, like, and I grew up as a network engineer, used to have a lot of passion for network. And then as other technologies started coming in, people thought network is not going to be important. Well, fast forward to now, everybody's talking about networking skills are very important, because if you want to connect all these clouds, a network has to connect, and therefore you will need to know some of those networking skills. So I think to sum it up, what I would say is that the skills evolution, the constant learning, the methods of learning, because of all the information access we have, is fast changing, and fundamentals, however, will not change.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think I heard some themes there popping out, which is we'd like to see the rise of the Renaissance man or the Renaissance woman in tech, which is no longer you have to be a deep specialist.
Yeah.
You can be multidisciplinary. The technology is much more approachable and accessible now through learning mechanisms. And I think the level at which people operate now is higher. Virtualization has hidden a bunch of distinctions that you have to make. What's my server's name?
Yeah. No, I think that's right on. And so, in addition to constant learning, and if you read or paid attention to Sanjay and Adela, he'll talk about growing the learn it all culture at Microsoft. I also think, in that spirit of thinking about things differently, I think it's learning. I do agree with you on the basics. When you start to think about what's your mission, I also would propose it's more and more, it's about the outcome. And what I mean by that is, this concept of platform as a service. I can appreciate if you've done building servers and if you've been a DBA all of your life and you're really cool and love OSI levels 1, 2, and 3, it's going to be hard to give it up. But now we're in a point where you may have to ask, I would consider, where's the value in what you're doing? Is it in building that, or is it in the data that resides, and then what are you connecting to that data, and then how are you analyzing that data, right? And we've gone from, the olden days, right? I'd have to learn how to build the glass to make it, to, yep, got the glass, got it, great, and I'm rocking and rolling. And while a SQL database or, Oracle, I'm sure all of our competitors, right, have platforms, is one approach. We are, and our partners are, creating entire sets of those technologies where now, as an example, you can take a high trust, aka HIPAA, if anyone knows HIPAA, right, environment to include machine learning and a database as a service and turn that up, right? So if you have to have a compliant environment to support clinical trials, clinical data, doctor's office, you're able to turn that entire infrastructure up as a service. You don't have to worry about turning off any of those servers, right? And away you go. So my only point is that gets you to an outcome faster. And so I would posit we all, as communities, need to think about what is that business impact? What are we trying to get to? And then how do we work back from there?
Good. So, okay, we've done a sterling job here of keeping these guys talking. But I really was hoping there's some questions from the audience. Jerome.
I have the mic, Jerome.
Oh, sorry.
1 minute.
I have kids. I can talk real loud. Unless okay. Uh-oh. Let's make sure it's on. Better? Good? No. Okay. Really sensitive. I can't move around. So, speaking to IT professionals, people in the industry, one thing that I saw early on in cloud adoption, it wasn't from the enterprise. The topic tonight, enterprise cloud adoption, it wasn't enterprise. It was little pockets of shadow IT business folks trying to say, well, we're just tired of waiting. IT isn't meeting our needs. We're going to go forward without you. We got a credit card. I looked at the website. I know what it's going to cost. I'm just going to do it. So they'll go out there in the wild, wild west of cloud. So now companies have been out there, and the credit card bill's been running, and 6 months later they forgot they had their dev environment, and the bill comes due, and now they're like, now IT, come solve all our problems. But you've been out there. You didn't want us early. Now what's our incentive to help you? So now we're getting asked, IT teams, CIOs, help us, but it's out there. So I've seen companies go back and say, well, how do we start over? If we had to do this greenfield the right way, how do we put a fence, a border perimeter around this stuff and get a handle on it? We don't even know what we have. And it's great if you're only dealing with one company. But now there's so many choices out there. We got 2 on the panel, but there's more, right? There are multiple vendors, and you outsource to a SaaS provider, Workday, other people. Everyone's on the cloud and they don't know where their data is. How do you deal with that? Just a little question. Just a small.
It's a great question. There's definitely.
If it's loud,
No,
too, loud.
This has led to some chaos. So.
So Jerome, this is where I spend a lot of time. So let me just say a few points on it. So first is the comment we made, and we used to joke around quite a bit, slow IT to fast IT. Is it slow IT, is it fast IT? But where you are now, you're talking about probably like 7-8 years back, when the phenomenon starting and started to happen. But where it is now, what's happening is, especially definitely seeing it in the big enterprises, but to Mutuk's point, it applies to every company, is that the CIO office is now really thinking about how you're going to interface with the major businesses. Every company, small, big, usually has 5 or 6 major business units. And they are actually creating a role, some call it CTO, some are calling it digital officer, but they have a well-defined role that is not talking about how the business requirements are going to be met. That's one evolution. Second is how the CIOs now, and I could say it in a fun way, that they're really understanding how they're going to be managing a bunch of different clouds, for that matter. But then at the same time, all the things we talked about, their application focus, their infrastructure focus, that needs to keep rapid pace. Otherwise, what's going to happen is the budget pressures and the businesses will go what they need to do to get things done. Because a lot of the businesses are under the same pressure, startups are in, to do faster development, faster innovation. Nobody can put mind-boggling amount of lab infrastructure. So they can get a dev cloud from anywhere to get their apps tested. They're going to do those things. So all those things that they've done is, the CIO's now role has again become relevant, or come back in big time in a vogue, but it's getting redefined. I mean, if you see on LinkedIn, every other day article comes out, CIO role has become now this, now this. End of the day, the CIO is there to support different businesses. And that's the big time evolution I'm seeing, where that's what is driving now behaviors. Again, all the questions that Cliff asked earlier around security concerns, the client, the customer data protection, all those forcing behaviors where IT is coming back in big time in fashion. And now you got to manage the expectation of the business.
Yeah, great answer. Go ahead, please.
Just to add to that, especially in the startup world, in growing startups, we see companies who use tons of these different tools. In fact, I worked with a prospect, and they had more tools than the number of employees they had. Yeah, and they like, oh, yeah, let's go get this, because there's a free trial, let's use it. And then they get into it, and then there's 1 or 2 people who are completely, they love the product, and then they want to stick with that. And then when someone else wants to replace that, it's hard. So they buy another software. So these teams work in different silos, right? Which is good and bad for companies like us, because now we are starting to think in terms of how to integrate with these, so that at the executive level, management level, they can bring all this data into our platform and have one dashboard through which they can see how the work is getting done, right? Because now everyone need not pay for that, whatever the cost is, monthly cost, to all these different tools. They can just come to one place to look at it. So it drives innovation on one side, but it is a headache to manage.
Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Dimitri, first time here. So,
That's a great question, Jerome.
I'm going to try to ask a question to the experts, maybe Sanjay, Chris specifically. We just talked about the privacy, right? How one of the companies is saying, move my data, keep it in Canada, move my data, keep it in China. On the other hand, you talked about the cognitive services that your company is doing. It's it's a very interesting challenge. I'm trying to understand what's the trend that you guys are witnessing or seeing. How's the data gets actually aggregated back for the meaningful insights, for example, for Watson services or for your cognitive services at Microsoft? Are there any tools emerging? Because it seems to be that the effort is to move the data further away from the centralized data store, right? But how do you actually reassemble it back for the meaningful insights? Because insights are hugely dependent on that. Just very curious. Thank you so much.
Lots of different ways. And I can give you a few. The common thread is data. How do you, to your point, right, Dimitri, you said it well, everyone's putting it, right, as we'll say a subset of data, in a place to run queries. And I think that's probably the commonality. I'll give you a few examples. There's a manufacturer of a very specialized type of product here in the region. They, through history, have acquired over 10 ERP systems. They said, well, we are not going to go buy a massive or invest in multi-million-dollar ERP CapEx investment because we're seeking to be acquired and we're looking to manage our cash flow. What are we going to do? Let's put it all in a data lake. So they extracted it all to a common point to run queries. Just relatively basic stuff, but they couldn't do it otherwise, right? You either have to modernize completely on one platform, for argument's sake, or figure out how do you get the data out and put it in one place so you can run pretty basic queries about production and things like that. There's another, we'll call them sort of an e-commerce type of company. They're a pretty big consumer of SQL, not to fly that flag, it just sort of is. On the structured side, they've said, well, we're now getting to a point where this whole big data thing is getting really real. They're a global company, and their business is constantly coming to them with queries. And right now, they're sort of putting band-aids around their systems to answer whatever marketing is asking them about a potential set of clients. They are multi-level marketing. They also sell some of their own product. So, hey, are vitamins sold with cosmetics? I don't know. We'll go find it. Right? So they were doing a lot of that. So now it's we do have to extract data from a bunch of disparate systems, but we're going to put them into a 3-tier. Right now, they're going to take a Hadoop approach, and eventually they are going to have some hooks into a data lake because they want to combine the structured data as well. You know, how does this match up with the sovereignty? It's a good question. I don't have a silver bullet answer. You know, I would say in the case of the latter company, they're still trying to figure out where would that reside. I think from an economics point of view, it's going to reside in the U.S. because that's where the majority of their systems are. Is that the right answer? Well, you know, they do abide by PCI compliance, right? They have to make some decisions about their underlying fabric. Are they 27018 compliant? Are they, you know, SOC 2 compliant, SOC 3? I don't think there's the defined answer just yet, because still it is the needs of the business that are driving these solutions. So I hope I've touched on a couple of things there.
So I'll just quickly give a slightly different, not different perspective, but different approach with this. See, data is now everywhere. There's a lot of data. But why are we worrying about all this data? We are worrying about this data because we want to put AI on it, and then being able to get something tangible out of it so that we can grow our businesses. And in the end, that's what we are worrying about, whether the data is in the cloud or data is within your own setups. So I think one of the areas where, whichever company you all are, I think one of the things that every company will really think about is, first, you got to have a very robust strategy to collect data. Then, in fact, I read an article on a Microsoft page where they really talked about a lot of time will be spent on having robust strategies on how to organize all the data. And then comes, okay, you got to analyze it, put machine learning on it, put the trust factors that Chris talked about, but then also how you're going to infuse it so that you can drive a business. Otherwise, I mean, like everybody has petabytes of data just lying there, nobody's doing anything with it. I mean, like, And that's the huge problem. But we got to apply that approach so that you can do the AI, in the end, use the data to grow the business. That's my summary of the problem.
Any other comments on that?
That is exactly what's happening here, or like at least in my mind, to figure out, when we're growing, we're scaling, how are we going to organize all the data that we plan on collecting and then turning into valuable information to just literally increase our growth.
Got to have a strategy.
Right.
Right. And there are techniques like anonymizing data that actually takes the sting out of the nationalization issue, which says, as long as you don't mind, as long as, it was female, this age group, this general ethnicity, or whatever the data that's relevant, but it's not personally identifiable. That tends to reduce it. It's not the bank balance, right? It's a range. It's anything that's not personal seems to be. You do it, but you sort of have to do approximations, and you also got to negotiate because, if Russia says it's my data, they might not care that it's anonymized. They just, said it's my data.
There's a reason there are no major cloud providers in Russia. Yep.
Okay. Just the mushrooms.
Got a question over here.
Good, great, thank you.
So I'm a technical neophyte, but when I hear about the cloud, it sort of sounds like all boats are rising with the tide. And in the industry that I come from, the energy industry, I don't think, my experience is people aren't as forthcoming with their data. So if you're a startup and you have a great application, great idea for the energy space, for the defense space, those are probably two obvious ones, maybe banking. How do you navigate that firewall with your application and the challenges of data management and data ownership that the utility, for example, puts on that data? How can you go into the marketplace with a cloud application and make that work?
Can I just answer from my perspective? So it goes into one of the things that I look into. And it all comes down to the different certifications that you guys have. And I look to see who can I piggyback off of. So if your infrastructure is compliant with, like PCI compliance, or you're saying some of the SOCs that are out there, that's what I look for, because then at that point I can just say, we are utilizing a system that we're integrated with, or whatever the case may be, that's compliant in this way. So now when I approach a defense, contract, or some type of highly regulated type of contract in that scenario, I have the confidence in saying that your data is going to be secured, because I'm literally piggybacking off of, they spend billions of dollars to do. So,
and I can attest that that is good enough. So I've had, if you didn't hear me, I just said I can attest that that's good enough. I've had clients leveraging our clouds, and they've come to me and they said, my client is asking me if we're FISMA medium. Are we? If you don't know FISMA medium, NIST, don't ask me what's in FISMA medium or FISMA high. I won't be able to tell you. But the Azure commercial cloud is FISMA medium. If you go into our government cloud, it's high. But my point in telling you this is that was sufficient for the government client in that particular case. To Paul's point, hey, you're riding on our coattails. The only other thing I'll add, Mutuk, do you want to add? Just off the top of my head is, don't shy away from the conversation. Like, I embrace security and compliance because we've spent a lot of money on it. We have a lot of policies that have been well received in the marketplace, and I would encourage you to read the fine print with regards to the major providers around security, around compliance, not just the data policy. How do I get my data out? Can I get my data out? Where is it stored? Do I have that choice? Things like that. So that's the other bit. Just do some extra reading, because it's easy to get enamored with, I want to get started. And then you might be 6 months down the line and you may not have read something that might cause you some concern.
Great. Good answers. Great questions too.
Yeah.
How are we doing?
Yeah.
All right. So Chris, first off, I love the fact that you view yourself as old school being Microsoft and just thinking about Windows. Because one of my first sales jobs was going to a major client telling them that we were no longer going to develop OS2 Warp. Yeah, apparently
Not a lot of that.
Yeah, not a lot of that. So yes, no longer an IBMer, but there a long time. So coming from an IBM, old IBM perspective, one is Sanjay, glad you're there. Got a question for each one of you. One is for Sanjay, how is the Red Hat acquisition going to be different than the SoftLayer one? So SoftLayer was supposed to help launch IBM.
You're pretty foolish, like, you can ask me that question.
But I can't. but how is it going to change the trajectory? Because everybody knows IBM had some missteps. Doesn't mean it's bad. It just means missteps. The game isn't over. The second thing is with Microsoft, Azure has done very well with cloud from a market share standpoint. So what are you seeing? What do you think are the top 2 or 3 reasons that have enabled you to capture that market share, given that an IBM or somebody else may have been kind of in there and talking about it early? How did you grow faster?
So, there's a video recording going on here, Dale. You know that, right? So,
you're gonna discard me from LinkedIn.
So I will talk about, I will answer your question, but I will answer in terms of what I'm really feeding into the different discussions. I'm involved on both sides. I learned at Cisco how to do acquisition integration really well. Cisco has done, as for my last count, around 200 acquisitions, and there are a lot of best practices, a lot of good ways of doing it, a lot of bad ways of doing it.
Right.
So one of the things that IBM will have to do right is how not to lose the soul of Red Hat, at the same time be able to provide it the scale of IBM.
Focus on the software guys that have
And-
done multitudes of acquisitions.
Right,
Yes.
exactly, right? And at the same time, whenever you integrate a successful company like Red Hat is doing $2 billion, software was doing a good chunk before it came to IBM as well, right? The best practices that require that, how do you keep the soul, how do you keep the IP, and look to enhance it, but at the same time, don't keep it too far away as a separate company. And those are learnings I got from Cisco, where Cisco was an acquisition integration machine. It would do so well. There's a process laid out. There were people who would come in, and majority of our acquisitions did really, really well. So the goal would be that again to benefit from why Red Hat is Red Hat, and then at the same time learn from past and new ways of how we need to go forward. And that's, I think, how it's going to play out.
So it's really just execution.
It's going to be about execution, at the same time, really make it like part of the one company versus keeping it 2 separate companies for a very long time.
I think you're gonna have to thread the needle, because Red Hat has such a unique culture and they're very passionate about it. But I don't know SoftLayer well.
That was the question.
No, I know. But I think the other thing is Red Hat is just such a unique brand within IT that I wish you well. But I'm voting. I think you guys can do it. I mean that in great sincerity, because there is so much tied to the culture that if you goof it up, I think the goose is cooked, right? So I think I have to think that IBM said, hey, we gotta think about that coming in. I mean, if they did their due diligence, which I assume they did, especially paying 190 per share of 194. That they'll do it right.
Yeah, and they do have a history of doing it both ways. Integration from the beginning, keeping it separate. So IBM does know how to do that both ways. SoftLayer it's just something happened wrong.
Wow, we got some awesome questions here.
That was before Sanjay. We're not talking about SoftLayer.
Yeah, but how did Microsoft grow so quickly in the cloud?
Well, I think to be fair, right, we have played some mad catch up over the last few years from an IaaS point of view, directly competing with AWS. What sometimes gets lost in translation unless, I can't remember his name, there's this guy at Forbes that does this cloud report I think it's every month. And he does a pretty good job providing a synopsis of all the major players and really looking at the market holistically to include our Office 365 cloud, which is really SaaS, and our Dynamics cloud, which is also SaaS business systems, but has more extensibility for partners. The business system side is our ERP side. So we do ERP, we do sales, we do customer service and things like that. So I think when you look at the overall market share, that's definitely helped, right? And we are transitioning clients from that on-premises experience in Office to one that is leveraging the cloud as a platform for things like mail storage, for anti-spam, antivirus, internet, and that then translates into bigger dollars from an overall market share. From a pure hybrid cloud point of view, I'm doing this off the cuff, but I think a big one's been our embrace of open source. And I mentioned this earlier, those workloads are growing at over 100% versus our native Windows OS workloads. And so I think being able to be a full-fledged OSS provider, meaning over 6 or 7 unique kernels of Linux, thousands, maybe low thousands, I'm not really sure, of OSS applications, like the MongoDBs of the world. Support for our competitors, multiple languages, right? PHP, Ruby on Rails, Python, and just a very robust multiple versions of LAMP stack. I think that's been very key. And then last, coming back and placing really big bets around security and trust and compliance. So I'll give you one quick example. And when GDPR came around as a requirement in the end of May, we viewed that as a compelling event to not just raise the bar to be GDPR compliant as much as you can be as an infrastructure provider, because you can't buy GDPR compliance. If anyone comes to peddle GDPR compliance, tell them no thank you. But we have certain obligations as an infrastructure provider that we had to meet. We didn't just say, hey, we'll meet those in the EU. What we said is, what do we need to do for our fabric to be compliant? And then let's make that the standard globally. And I think that has spoken volumes to especially our Fortune 500 base, the Fortune 1000 base. But it matters to you folks in the room if you're not in that Fortune category, right? Matters to all my clients, none of whom are there. That's obviously very critical. So I think those 3 elements have been all very important.
I think we're getting close to time, so I want to, first of all, thank the panel. Fantastic job, guys. I really appreciate, you taking the time to prepare, and the quality and the care you put into your answers. I think I learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. I hope the same for the audience. Certainly, great questions. Thank you very much all for taking the time, listening, and engaging with the panel. They're not going away. From this room.
I am, but I'll leave my cards. I have to go relieve a babysitter. I'm sorry.
I'll be the Microsoft guy. So, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.